Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Today is another one of our episodes reviewing an LODD, line of duty death, to learn from these lessons, from these tragic events, and try to prevent them from happening in the future. My name is Doug. I'm one of the hosts of the show, as you all know. Joined today by Paul and Dirk. Zach is working and cannot join us. So, how you doing, Dirk? What's new?
Everything is good so far. Everybody's fighting flus and various upper airway infections. But I'm okay. Family's okay. It's all good.
Yeah, we're all doing. My house is all sick too, so it's all going around. Paul, just getting over COVID?
Hey, yeah. I'll try to talk between coughs here, but yeah, I've been fighting COVID for over a week now, and my son and daughter got it too, and I'm gonna cough.
Well, you lasted the longest out of all of us before you got it. You finally joined the club. Dirk gave it to me, at least.
All these years, I've never caught it, never even had a COVID test, and here I am.
Well, I still think that eventually everybody's going to get it. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, boy, did it kick me down. I thought I got hit by a big custom fire engine.
Yeah. An old school Mac, eh?
An old school Mac. There you go. I like it.
They were built with steel.
With steel, real steel. Hey, Dirk, I'm reading a book about your hometown, or you worked for a while at Essen.
Oh, really? A book?
I'm reading a book about Krupp.
Oh, yeah.
The arms, the steel manufacturer Krupp, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it all started in Essen, so I was thinking of you every time it talks about it.
Cool.
Okay, let's get to the incident we're going to talk about here. November 1st, 2002, a 36-year-old male volunteer lieutenant, who the victim, died after being crushed by an exterior wall that collapsed during a 3-alarm residential structure fire. The victim was operating a hand line near the southwest corner of the building, where there was an overhanging porch. As the fire progressed, the porch collapsed onto the victim, trapping him under the debris. Efforts were made by nearby firefighters to free him when the entire exterior wall of the structure collapsed outward and he was crushed. The victim was removed from the debris within 10 minutes, but attempts to revive him were unsuccessful, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The background of the volunteer fire department in command of this incident is comprised of 30 firefighters. The department has one station and serves a population of about 2,500 people in a geographical area of 5 square miles. The victim was from a volunteer fire department that was providing mutual aid during this incident. The mutual aid department has 7 fire stations and is comprised of 50 volunteer firefighters. It serves a population of approximately 13,000 in an area about 6 square miles. The 36-year-old victim had been a volunteer firefighter with this department for 22 years and served 10 years as an officer. The training the victim had was over 500 hours that included NFPA firefighters level 1 and 2, first responder, incident command, advanced firefighting, emergency medical technician, search and rescue, and live fire training. So, to me, the population and the area is a lot smaller than the volunteer department we were on together, Paul. But they had 7 fire stations. We only had 1. So I don't know if everyone just takes a truck home with them and they call it a fire station, or I always like to compare them to our neck of the woods.
Is this like in the really dense boroughs or suburbs of a big city or something, where in eastern United States, so there's a fire department on every corner kind of thing? Is that kind of what this
I'm
really
not
is?
exactly sure where in Pennsylvania it is, but it doesn't seem like it's close to a big city, because all of the mutual aid was all volunteer fire departments. So it kind of seems to me like it's in the middle of nowhere. But
there's lots of big volunteer fire departments down there that cover like many the suburban areas, if you will.
Well, it doesn't sound like a very big department. It's only 50 members and 13,000 people in 6 square miles.
Right.
But 7 stations. They got 1 fire station for every square mile.
Yeah. Probably might have been amalgamated from other stations at the time or something.
But the victim sounds like he's had all the typical training that a volunteer firefighter would have. I mean, not a big city fire academy, but basically the same training. Yeah. Dirk, any comment on that stuff?
Oh, it's just wondering about the square mileage there. It sounds
Yeah.
really small area and lots of stations. So, but which is good. Lots of members. So I'm thinking, staffing wise, it's a pretty good response, right?
Sure.
Kind
So
of
the
the
initial
opposite.
alarm came in at about 2,300 hours. The first arriving fire department that had incident command had two officers. The chief and the assistant chief arrived separately in primary or privately owned vehicles, so they went straight from home to the call. Engine 312, tanker 313, and ambulance 314. They called for mutual aid, which brought two mutual aid fire departments with two engines, a tanker, a rescue, and an air cascade unit. The units from the first and second alarms, sorry, the units on the first alarm arrived with 2304 to 2316, so 16 minutes after the first alarm, and the second alarm was called at 2308, so pretty quick after they got there. The incident command uh, department also sent one ambulance and one tanker after the initial response. Eventually, five more mutual aid departments sent apparatus, an ambulance, four tankers, two engines, a ladder truck, and a cascade. I mean, that tells me the fact that there's like six tankers there and one ladder truck. It seems like it's a pretty rural area.
Yeah, this sounds like, rural PA. There's a fire station on every corner, and they're all amalgamated together, and they have, a lot of older hydrant systems and stuff. So tankers are prevalent as well, and yeah.
So, units dispatched on the second alarm arrived on scene from 2310. So, some of them beat the first alarm units there to 2350, almost an hour after the initial alarm. There was about 50 firefighters on scene when the collapse occurred at 2354, almost an hour into the event. Once the collapse happened, a third alarm was immediately requested following the collapse. Four more fire departments and a life flight helicopter responded. The structure that was involved was a wood frame balloon construction. It was built during the early 1800s and had been remodeled several times. Homes in this block were originally built as row houses, and at one time there was a dwelling that connected the fire building and exposure B. The fire building, exposure B, and exposure D were very similar in construction. At the time the fire occurred, exposure D was being used as a storage area for vending equipment and other miscellaneous items. The structure was built into a sloping hillside and had three habitable levels, topped by an attic storage area. Total combined living space measured approximately 4,680 square feet. The first floor, or Division 1, had living areas, a kitchen, a bathroom, an office, laundry, and indoor access to an elevated porch from the side C. Entry to the first floor was made from street level at the front of the house. The second floor, or Division 2, had four bedrooms, a bathroom, and was accessible from the first floor by an internal staircase that was located at the front of the house. There was also an exterior stairway attached to the north-facing outer wall of exposure D that led from street level up to Division 2. The basement was being used as a separate living quarters and had a living room, bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, and furnace room. Both the fire building and exposure D had an overhanging porch from the second level on side C. The porch wrapped around the BC corner and extended the entire length of side B of the fire building. Witnesses reported that at the time of the fire, the porch was being used to store many miscellaneous items, including a clothes washer and a dryer. From the area under the porch, there was direct access to a garage that sat behind the dwelling. The garage opened up into an alley where fire suppression apparatus were staged during the fire. The fire building was occupied by one tenant who was at home at the time of the fire, but at the time the fire started, but escaped on his own prior to the start of fire suppression activities. The structure was not equipped with sprinklers or smoke detectors.
Yeah, so obviously, balloon frame, huge hazard. Was row houses. Sounds like one house was gone at the time of the fire, so torn down or whatever. And it had that back balcony wrapped around kind of thing. Very common in the Northeast, those back balconies that often get closed in over the years and are subject to code issues and access issues and stuff. That's all. I was just kind of drawing it in my mind. You saw me motioning there. I was just kind of laying the house out in my head.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a picture of that. It sounds like a beautiful home, like a legacy home, right? 1800s and stuff with the wraparound porch. Sounds pretty neat. And anything on the hill with kind of like a walkout thing. I like these buildings, but you're right, Paul. Like we know balloon frames are very difficult, and the fire spread is it's pretty quick and can be anywhere, right? It could start in the basement, you could get it in the attic, and it just goes everywhere once it makes it through the walls there. So yeah, but we'll see what led to
Yeah,
this.
kind of. It sounds to me like there was a lot of cluster and storage on the deck and the porch that obviously add weight that it's maybe not designed for when it was made in the 1800s or whatever. But it sounds like it was a nice house at one time. I don't know if it still was a nice house so after 200 years of being there, but and probably multiple ownership changes.
Come on, a laundry machine on the porch? That's classy.
Yeah,
I bet there was a bench, like a weight bench in front.
yeah, an iron gate and a pit bull.
Yeah, and the pit
No, an
All
bull.
right.
old car seat, old bench seat
Yeah,
from a car.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how we did things up in northern Quebec when I lived up there. Yeah.
Okay, so like we said, the event actually started October 31st. 2,300 hours. Volunteer department was dispatched to a working house fire. First arriving on the scene at 2304 were two officers, the chief and the assistant chief, who lived nearby and drove their personal vehicles. The officers immediately began to survey the fire scene, with the assistant chief going to the rear and the chief remaining in front of the fire building to assume incident command. During the initial size up, the assistant chief reported the fire was showing in the B side basement area with flames extending about 3 feet under the porch towards exposure B. The IC radioed that he observed fire extended upward from the basement area into Division 1 of the fire building, and that the area was showing heat damage. He also reported heavy smoke in Divisions 1 and 2 and the attic of the fire building, with smoke extending into exposure D. The IC radio dispatcher requested a second alarm. So they showed up to a pretty good working fire, called for more help, which doesn't always happen on volunteer apartments, but it's good they did there. Engine 312 was the first unit to arrive on the incident scene following the initial alarm, the first fire apparatus after the chief's anyways. They connected to a hydrant at the northeast corner and staged to the east or the alpha side of the structure. 2 inch and 3/4 pre-connected hand lines were pulled from engine 312. One was taken to the AB corner of the fire building and was directed to the flames on side B. The second hand line was stretched to the fire building, where firefighters attempted to enter through the front door from side A. However, flames and heat forced them to retreat. Firefighters then took another inch and 3/4 line from engine 312 and into exposure D through the front door. They entered divisions 1, 2 in the basement to breach the common walls in an attempt to stop the fire spread. Firefighters were operating in all 3 levels when several of them reported hearing a thud. All the firefighters immediately exited the building and found that the porch located on the B side of the structure had collapsed. Engine 111, with the victim driving, a different officer and 2 firefighters, arrived second and were sent to the rear of the CD corner, where they connected to a nearby hydrant. Firefighters took an inch and 3/4 line from engine 111 and entered exposure D from the rear to check for fire extension. They reported seeing the crew from engine 312 that had entered from the front. Firefighters from engine 111 set up a portable deluge gun off of engine 111 at the CD corner. It was operating at approximately 500 to 600 gallons per minute and was aimed to concentrate on the upper floors of the fire building. Tanker 313 was the third apparatus to arrive and was sent to the rear side of the structure to set up the dump tank. Engine 352 was directly followed Tanker 313 and was staged to the rear BC area near the tanker. 2 inch and 3/4 lines were connected by a gated Y to a 2.5 inch line that came off of engine 352. The victim was operating one of these inch and 3/4 lines when the incident occurred. I know it gets a little confusing with all these apparatus names, but just trying to paint the picture in your head.
Yeah, it's kind of odd that they set up the portable monitor at the rear, but they also saw crews inside at the front
Yeah,
fighting the fire or checking for extension. So
it
that
kind of
was
seems
just
to me so far like people aren't really being tasked with anything by anyone in command. They're just
maybe
kind of showing up and grabbing a hydrant and grabbing a line and going in wherever they see fit, right?
doing what they usually do, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Engine 21 responded on the second alarm and was sent to a hydrant near the southeast or AB side of the fire building to run a forward lay for the tower. Tower 34 staged on the street directly to the east of side A of the fire building where they set up the deck gun. The master stream was not put into operation until after the collapse and rescue. 2-inch and 3/4 hand lines were pulled from engine 21. Firefighters stretched one line to the vacant lot area between the unattached exposure B and the fire building. 2 firefighters were operating this hand line when reportedly they heard a cracking noise and, fearing a collapse, quickly exited the area by traveling eastward and climbing up a ladder over a retaining wall to street level. They reported seeing the victim near the BC corner of the fire building just seconds before the porch collapsed. The second hand line was taken into the basement of exposure B, where firefighters directed the water stream toward heavy flames coming through the windows on the B side of the fire building. Firefighters operating this hand line reported seeing the victim near the BC corner. So the victim activity on the fire ground. Victim was near the BC corner of the fire building and attempted to knock down hot spots. He was the nozzleman on an 1 and 3/4 hand line pulled from the gated Y off of the 2.5-inch hand line from engine 352. It's what we call in Alberta a Cisco load a lot, Paul's favorite load.
I don't know about that, but yeah, it can be handy.
I was there once delivering a truck with you when you introduced it to a whole new fire department that night, and they all put it on their truck, and 2 days later they probably had no idea and changed it all back, but it's a different story. The line was becoming snagged on a nearby fence as he attempted to advance. A second firefighter got behind the victim to guide the line around the fence just as the porch collapsed, and the victim was pinned by the debris. The victim remained conscious and called for help. 2 firefighters who were operating the other 1 and 3/4 line from the gated Y, the other half of the Cisco, ran to the victim and immediately began attempts to free him. Just as they began, the entire B-side wall collapsed and they had to flee the area to avoid being struck by falling debris. As soon as possible following the collapse, firefighters rushed to the area and began digging through the debris near a light that they believe was from the victim's flashlight. The victim was recovered within 10 minutes following the collapse. Efforts to revive him were not successful, and he was pronounced dead at the scene at 0050 hours on November 1st. So an hour and 10 minutes after the initial alarm came in.
Yeah, classic balloon frame, hey? Maybe, well, I'm not sure about the attached porch, but the wall collapse it's a classic balloon frame thing that they detach from the whole frame altogether and then collapses.
The other thing I kind of questioned from reading all that is it kind of sounds like they had heavy fire showing and they all just grabbed 1 and 3/4 lines. They had hydrants, they had positive water supply, and nobody grabbed the big line. But like we said earlier, right, you just do what you're trained to do. And like if that's all you have pre-connected, you're just so trained to grab the pre-connect and go that, I mean, it's a 4,000 square foot house. It's a pretty big building. It's not a bungalow that we're used to in these areas. So.
It's a lot of wood, that's going to go, and it's old wood, and it's going to burn hot.
Wood,
yeah. No, I mean, they grabbed that one monitor and set it up, and they had the tower getting ready, but still, the first lines they all pulled were 1 and 3/4, and it's so hard to get guys to get used to. I always had a truck with at least every truck had at least one, if not two, pre-connected 2.5-inch lines, or one. I liked one connected to a little mini monitor and one connected to a nozzle that you could grab. But it's so hard to get out of that habit of we always grab the pre-connect.
Yeah, but in that case, it was the distance to the porch that caused the incident, right?
It sounds like they were in
even if he's sitting on a 2.5, it wouldn't have changed the fact that the collapse occurred. No. I'm just wondering how much the deluge gun, and I think it was on the same side. I think
it was Delta, Charlie Delta
side. So if something's blasting into this balloon frame, I'm not sure if that might have caused the whole wall to collapse earlier. Maybe
probably the weight of the porch, the balcony on there. So the weight of that, and eventually it pulls off. But obviously, for it to pull off, the wall was in a bad condition already from the fire, and then the wall collapsed after So it sounds like they were in a lower area because the guys that were in there had to climb out of with a ladder, climb up the retaining wall to the street in the front. So they were in a lower area between
Yeah.
the two buildings.
So on to the recommendations listed in the report. The first recommendation is fire departments should ensure that incident command continually evaluates the risk versus gain when deciding on offensive or defensive fire attack. To me, that's pretty straightforward, right? You gotta make calculated risks. I think we all want to be aggressive firefighters, but we all also have that line where it's like, you can't go in this building. It's not gonna go well. That being said, the people in the building that were being aggressive aren't the ones that got in trouble. They were, I don't want to say they were fine, but they were okay inside. It's not where the collapse occurred.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were never mentioned in the report that there was any trouble with that. So I'm thinking they got pulled out right after the porch collapsed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they heard a thud and then they evacuated at that time.
Yeah. So
But
in the end, this firefighter was sitting in a defensive position. He wasn't going interior or anything like that, right? He was just
too close.
he was just too close to that collapse zone, right?
Right. That's why I added that bit about offensive versus defense, and you have to continually assess that. And for example, get a defensive attack can be based on the fact that offensive strategy has been abandoned for personnel safety. They hadn't quite got there yet. They were still being very aggressive and offensive, if you will, even though this guy was in what you would call a defensive position because he was outside. There was offensive going on inside, and if he's close enough to be hurt, then he's offensive as well, even though he's standing beside shooting water in the windows or whatever, right? In this incident, offensive firefighting operations continued until the collapse. They never declared a defensive strategy and set up perimeters and stuff like that. So that's a lack of command, in my opinion, in saying, hey, this is a goner. It's a 200-year-old house. We got fire on all 3 floors and exposures. And even though we got lots of people and lots of water and lots of everything, this is a waste.
Well, the report wasn't very detailed on what happened after the fact. I'm pretty sure that once the one wall comes off, that everybody's pulling back because it's just like a cot house, right? Those balloon frame houses. So I'm pretty sure that house burned to the ground. So
should have declared defensive earlier on, in my opinion. Balloon frame, 200 years old, nobody inside.
I don't agree. I don't love the idea of just saying, well, there's nobody inside, we can't go in, because like I said before, there's nobody inside to us until we go in and determine there's nobody inside. You still got to do primary searches. And to me, the only factors that should determine offensive versus defensive is the fire you're presented with and the stability of the structure. Like you still need to, if the fire isn't too big and the building appears sturdy, even if they say, oh, everybody's out, to me, you still got to go in and determine everybody's out. We still have the job to do primary searches and secondary searches. However, you show up and there's fire blown out every window and through the roof and whatever, then you got to make that decision that we can't go in there.
Yeah, I agree, Doug. You always want to try to at least do a primary search and then pull out. I think, like, if it wouldn't have been for the collapse of the porch, there might have been more fatalities because I'm pretty sure there was floor collapses pretty soon after. But again, it's not mentioned here. So, and also they didn't say or didn't tell us when they pulled the interior attack crews out, at what point. So it's kind of like there's not enough information on that, and we would be just speculating, right?
I think they all heard the collapse and heard the thud, and they all just came out and started rescuing the guy.
That's what it said. That's what it said. Yep.
But again, I don't think it was command pulling them out. I think they all just heard it and came out on their own.
See, and in my opinion, fire on all 3 floors, balloon frame, 200 years old. I'm questioning whether this should be a defensive only operation. In my opinion, of course, we can't see it. So
my point is just that we can't use a bystanders or an occupant saying everybody's out as a. That's not us saying it's clear. Like we still need to.
An occupant is pretty good.
If the situation in the building allows us to go in, we should be going in. Okay, recommendation number 2: firefighters Fire departments should ensure that a collapse zone is established, clearly marked, and monitored at structure fires where buildings have been identified at risk of collapsing. To me, that's a pretty broad statement. I mean, any building on fire has a risk of collapsing. And to say that every building needs a collapse zone that's 1.5 times the height of the building, like the textbook says. I mean, some World Trade Center, they would have been fighting the fire from Brooklyn. Like you can't always get that far outside. On a house like that, you probably can back up a little bit, but to me, it's just it's something that as a thinking firefighter, you got to keep all these things in your mind, and that's why command needs to be stepped back. Paul, you always say in a truck, maybe in a truck's good for some things, but outside the truck, seeing and hearing things happen can also help make your decisions. But the commander, in my mind, has to be back evaluating the whole picture because they're going to see things that operating crews aren't going to see, and that's the whole reason they're there. Same with the safety officer. I mean, if you're saying, "Oh, this building's coming down at any minute," then yeah, you pull back and you say, "Everybody, stay back. It's coming down for sure." But you can't just I think at every single fire you go to, you can't park all the trucks a block away and everybody stand back and spray water. It's part of the offensive defensive strategy, right?
It's part of knowing your building construction. Again, balloon frame is known for collapse. Modern single family houses, you get the roof to collapse, but I've never seen a wall collapsing unless it's actually totally engulfed in flames. So, yeah, it's really know your buildings, know your areas, and know what you're responding to, right? So within, especially the East Coast cities, I mean, they got very old houses there, so there's a greater risk of that. But they should know that too, right?
You know, all the structure fires I've been to that all collapsed within themselves. They all just fell into the basement. They don't very often fall outwards. This wall obviously fell outwards, but
And that might have been because of the balcony and
yeah,
the missing building that was beside it before, right? So you don't
yeah,
know if that affected it or not. A
yeah.
lot of
Maybe it
old
wasn't
buildings.
built to be a freestanding building, right? It was built to
Uh,
they all
right.
hold
Yeah.
each other's weight, and all of a sudden you take a big chunk of it out, and all of a sudden you're yeah.
Yeah. When I think about ours, like I remember a fire. It was an older building, corner building, and that actually came down. And guys knew that was going to happen, so they moved the ladder truck. So there was no damage, nobody got hurt. But again, know your construction, especially the older downtowns. That's called with parapet walls and kind of like the brick veneer. Those things that might collapse on you, right? So you should know that, and anything that has an overhang, there's always a risk that these things come off. But for single family residents in the newer areas, as Doug said, I'm not concerned about an outward collapse, more like an inward. So again, go defensive, and then you won't have a
The other
problem.
thing too is like if you're command and you know this building is going to collapse and it's not safe to be standing around, it's not safe to be inside it. You should probably call some heavy equipment and just have a controlled collapse and just push it all in on each other. And then you know when it's going to happen and you can prepare for it instead of just waiting around. Any more comments on that, Paul?
No, I just some of these narrow buildings in many areas, they may have iron bars holding them from expanding in the middle.
Yeah.
So that was pretty common in those days. If you had a long wall, tall wall, is they would tie one side to the other with iron bars or something. Not as much in a residential, more in a commercial, but that could have been a factor in the collapse as
Yeah.
well. But I really think the balcony was the indicator, and as far as the commander, in a vehicle or something like that, yeah, they do tend to lose the feel. But that's what your company officers are for. The company officers need to be informing you of what they're seeing, hearing, that kind of stuff to share that with you. And you might have to get in and out and look around too once in a while. But still, there should have been a sector officer. They had lots of people.
Yeah,
They
it
could
didn't
have
sound
had
like they had many sectors at all.
yeah,
Guys just
yeah,
grabbed lines, and
just
I mean the
so
victim
everybody
was a lieutenant, but he drove the truck and was on the handle and the nozzle. So,
right, yeah. And that's part of
but
this.
in our fire department back in the day, they were very common to not have sector officers. Command would just say, send me 2 firefighters, and you'd send 2 guys off your truck, and they'd go do something. And it
The
always frustrated me because I
guys
believe in
guys got upset with me when I said, "Okay, I'm going to take command, and you worry about the extrication here, and I'll take care of everything else." And they would
yeah,
all get like, "No, I can do it. I want to do it all." I'm going,
yeah.
"No, I'll worry about the highway and traffic and stars and everything else, and you worry about rescuing the people and making sure the car doesn't start on fire." And I got incredible pushback for sectoring
Well,
off like that.
Well, we
egos, right?
always
And
tell
it's
everybody's
change. People don't like the change. They don't like when you're the guy that is running the call not the way that we've always done it, right? But I'm sure if those same people waited 10 years and that became the way we always did it, they would like it.
I also think like we always approach things like we always say everybody's responsible for their own safety. So when I'm the firefighter on the hose line, I'm responsible for my own safety. I can take care of myself. But as Paul said, you need somebody that's further back, detached from the actual operation to oversee everything because we get tunnel vision, right? So it's always nice to say, yeah, it's your own responsibility, take care of your own safety. But that's why we have company officer. That's why we have chiefs. That's why we have a command system to have those guys that are a little bit further back. That's why we have a safety officer, right?
Firefighters are like a moth to a flame, right?
Yeah, good points. Recommendation number 3, fire department should establish and implement written standard operating procedures regarding emergency operations on the fire ground. I mean, to me, that's another no-brainer. You need to have on paper what to do. And it almost for the exact thing you described there, Paul, is it always used to bug me on our fire department. I don't want to name names. I mean, if you know, you know, but there was no like department way of doing anything. There was the captain of crew 1 did it his way. The captain of this crew did it his way. The captain of this crew did it his way. And if you were a guy that went to multiple crews calls, you almost had to sit back and be like, okay, who's in command? What are they going to want? Where you need to have, this is the way we all do it. So the individual person is just a piece in the puzzle, and it can easily be taken out and a new person put in, and it runs the same. And it always frustrated me that there was different people that ran the calls differently, but there was no leadership from above. Everything went fine, right? It all worked out, so let's not change anything.
The big thing is, of course, now we have that NFPA 1700, which is a guideline for firefighting operations. So that's the kind of thing here that because these guys did not have detailed procedures for fireground operations for any kind of fire. The other thing is they had all these different departments from different agencies working together, different stations. And that's something that if you're going to do that, you need to do some joint training.
Well,
That's
that's the
something that
next
I tried to
the
do.
next recommendation says that they kind of go
Yeah,
together, right? You need to have SOPs on how you're going to do things, and if you're going to work with multiple fire departments all the time routinely, you all need to share SOPs, or even better, come up with a common SOP so that when you show up to each other's calls, you just know how things go.
yeah, and we did that a few times when you and I were on the same department here, where we brought in 2 or 3 different departments that we commonly worked with, and had a big exercise together. Just to get used to each other, get to know each other and our equipment and what we could or couldn't do, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think with those written SOPs, a lot of guys get all upset about that because it's like, oh, I'm restricted now. I can only do this. It's like, well, there should be SOPs and SOGs. There's always the what if, and you can what if every call to death, right? But if you don't have a written standard procedure, it's also very, very tough to change anything. Like, and again, you want everybody on the same page. And as Doug said, if you have a regional mutual aid agreement, they should be all at the very basic on the same level, using the same SOPs or SOGs, so that on
And as,
scene
as an
everything is
individual,
streamlined, right?
as an individual, you should want your department to have SOPs because that covers your ass if something goes wrong. You just say, "Well, I was following the SOP," and then the chief gets in trouble instead of you. Where if there's no SOP and you're sending guys into a fire you shouldn't send them into, and the investigators come and say, "Well, why did they go in there?" Well, I don't know. I thought they should, right?
Because that's the way we've always done it,
That's the
but
way.
that doesn't hold up in court, right?
That's a common theme in all these ones that we go over. Is I bet you lots of these events happen, doing things that have happened a million times before, and nothing went wrong, right? Pulling an 1 3/4 every time, worked every time until this time, right? The one we did with the guy riding in the back of the pickup truck as a brush unit from 1975 worked for 30 years until it didn't, right? You need to.
Yeah, and some of it is common sense, like, oh, everybody now wearing a seatbelt. So if that guy would have been buckled in, that might have not happened, right? And now we talk about the modern fire load and the heat release rate. So bringing in a knife to a gunfight with that 1 3/4, at 2.5, might have well. In this case, it's a collapse. I don't think the water application had anything to do with it, but just to make a point here that SOPs and SOGs are important, and you have to have them written down, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't have made a difference, like you said. I think the fire was deep seated and had gone because the chief said he saw it on all 3 floors, 3 levels, and and the delta exposure, I think they said too. So, it wouldn't have made a difference the size of the line, but the big thing was we're training together and having a good command would have been the thing. Safety officer. They didn't have a safety officer appointed for the incident,
And they had
which
they
then
had the
means
perfect guy there to do it. The chief and the assistant chief both showed up. So
right.
the chief takes
And
command,
a chief from
and the assistant chief. That goes back to having SOPs. To me, that should be automatic. Your command, I'm
right,
safety, every single time.
right, yeah, and they had another chief, I think, from another
Yeah,
department too. So it
that's the other
says there
thing
was
is
6
like,
volunteer fire departments
uh, it's
at
okay
this
for chiefs
call.
of incoming fire departments to slide into your command structure. You don't all
Sure,
need your own command structure at the scene, right?
no,
You just have one command structure, and this chief takes this role, this chief takes this role, and then when we go to your call, we take that role. But it's so hard to
that's
get
what
people's department egos and chief egos to say, "Yeah, you're right. Let's all work together," instead of not.
ICS is all about.
Yeah,
I,
That's why I teach it.
I think in this case here, the both two chiefs were on the alpha side or on a side, right? So if you have units working on the Charlie side or whatever side, you need more safety officers on that side, right? You can't be just sitting in the front yard and trying to evaluate what's going on the Charlie side if you don't have eyes on it. So I think that would be important to have safety on different sides of the building.
Yeah, so I mean, tragic incident. Well involved fire when they got there, and maybe I think they should have had a defensive operation at the time it happened, but that's just. I mean, they also had guys in the delta exposure, and they were fine. They didn't have bad conditions in there.
yeah. It's hopefully they use it as a learning opportunity for their department, and in the future when they come up to this kind of fire, they'll think quicker about let's just go defensive, and you can go defensive and then switch to offensive, right? Knock some of the. Some people call it transitional attack. Hit it hard from the yard, which I don't like, but if you have fire showing on multiple floors and multiple rooms and multiple windows, you should probably knock some of that down before you decide we're going to go
Absolutely.
in. And
Yep.
but yeah, Dirk, your final comments?
Yeah, again, another tragic event we can learn from. In this case, collapse. So be mindful the buildings you respond to. Uh, fresh up on your building construction, local building construction knowledge, and stay safe out there. So
Awesome. Yeah. Well, another great show for us. Thank everybody for listening to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. We really appreciate your interest and hope that everybody finds these interesting and informative. I sure do when we're looking up them and talking about them. I'm starting to see some common themes in a lot of them too that you can take to work and try to get rid of in your own department. We'd really appreciate if you give us a like or a star or a thumbs up or whatever on the app that you use to listen to these. It means a lot to us, and it really means a lot to the algorithms that help people find us. Speaking of find us, you can follow us on social media at Podcast Traffic on Twitter. We have a Facebook page, Emergency Traffic Podcast, and Instagram. Some feedback on our email would also be great at emergencytrafficpodcast@gmail.com. So until the next time, let's all be safe out there and come back for the next one.